I am Loki of Asgard, and I am burdened with glorious purpose.
Loki, brother of Thor.
We have no quarrel with your people.
An ant has no quarrel with a boot.
You planning to step on us?
I come with glad tidings.
Hey, I'm Derek,
And I'm Noah, and you're listening to A Bite Of.
where we take our current favorite pop culture obsession and enjoy it one nibble at a time.
New season, new property. Let's get back to the MCU,
Holy smokes.
because Loki is coming.
Time travel madness.
Before we jump into our Before You Watch episode of Loki, make sure you're following us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, at A Bite of Pod. And also, we have a Patreon and a Discord and all that fun stuff. So check us out on there. Have fun. We have more content.
Yeah. I mean, and you can meet other people who like the Bite of Podcast. They're delightful. It's a great time.
Mm-hmm. Super delightful.
Speaking of time, Loki time. Time
Loki
travel.
time. So everybody's favorite God of Mischief is coming to Disney Plus, and I'm super excited because this moral compass pending character is an interesting pick for his own show. But I'm excited, and that's why we do this first episode before the show comes out to get a little refresher, not only for Derek and I, but for some listeners that might forget some MCU story and comic stuff, and just to have fun with the character before we get super serious in the show.
I always feel like it's like we do the research so you don't have to. And then we boil it down to a lovely podcast episode that you can listen to and enjoy.
Exactly.
I also
Exactly
think that Marvel was like, so how could we just give Tom Hiddleston more love and have more screen time of Tommy Boy? They're like, I don't know. Let's just give Loki an entire series.
Let's kill him first and then bring him back, but then it's not the same one, and then give him a show.
Exactly. I have to say, in doing this research, I am definitely, my own moral compass about Loki's moral compass is spinning. Because you see him do evil things, but then he somehow manages to bring it all back.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's a wild character.
Yeah. It really depends on what's going on and how he's feeling during that day. His frost giant, lineage sometimes comes out a little bit.
Dear old dad.
Yeah. So sometimes he needs to rein it in just a little bit. But I think that's why so many people love this character, because you do feel for him and you do understand him, and you also know you need to keep him at arm's length, but then your heart melts sometimes. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just so complicated.
It's like nature versus nurture, truth versus lies. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Chosen family versus actual family.
Oh my God, getting too deep.
Themes.
So let's get into it. Here's everything you need to know before watching the Loki series. Before we look at the MCU stuff, the stuff that this is directly going to follow, let's look at his comic book counterpart a little bit. Let's get the backstory. Let's see why this God of Mischief is so troublesome.
Yes, and so that is what I tend to do. I like to do a lot of the reading and peruse things and pull out interesting little tidbits. So, of course, when talking about Loki, we have to talk about his first appearance ever.
And it's a wild one.
It's a wild one. So this is in Journey into Mystery number 85, and it came out in October 1962, y'all. When we first meet Loki, he has been condemned to be in a tree by the gods until someone sheds a tear for his plight.
Yep.
So a lot of these comics start with Loki in a tree, on an island, sat on a throne, in a jail cell somewhere. He's always pondering his own existence by the punishment of someone else.
I mean, he does too much introspectiveness.
Sometimes, a little mind can breed some contempt that might not be there.
Right.
And that's what happens to our friend Loki. Now, granted, we don't know what he did to end up in the tree, but probably did some trickster godlike things.
Yeah, I think at this point when you see him, it's kind of like he's been around, he's been bad, nobody likes him. Watch out. Put him in a tree.
Put him in a tree. And I love it. It's like it's an illustration of the tree, and then there's a dotted line shaped Loki, And he's in this tree. Yeah. He is one with the tree. So he's had many, many years to be in this tree. And so, like I said, someone has to cry at the plight of Loki. But who could ever cry at such an evil trickster god? Well, Loki one-ups them because he is just that smart. And what he decides to do is take control of the tree. And as Heimdall is passing, he releases a single leaf. It floats down and stabs him in the eye. And so, therefore, releasing a tear.
I mean, it sounds dumb, but also it's super smart. Because it's like, oh, I wouldn't have expected a leaf to poke somebody in the eye to make him cry, and that's how he gets out. Smart going.
Yeah. It's the Loki way of doing things.
Yeah.
I think he also tends to have this theme where he will take control of something to use to his benefit.
Right.
And in this case, a tree and a tear. They have released him. So, of course,
he only escalates from there.
Yeah, it's like this is like the lowest of the low. Taking flora to his benefit, an evil tree. So he gets out and he is bent on vengeance against Thor because that whole thing of Odin loving Thor more than him not really feeling like Odin's son, has always existed. So he wants to get revenge. So he travels from Asgard to New York looking for Thor, and Thor at the time is in disguise as Dr. Don Blake.
Oh man, good old Donald Blake.
Donald Blake, and he's got like a little wooden cane, and when he wants to transform into Thor, he smashes the cane into the ground and he transforms.
Yeah, it's a great time. Thor was banished because, that's what happens with gods. He was banished to Earth, and then he's like, I'm going to erase his memory, and he's going to be Donald Blake, but also he has a staff that makes him turn into Thor. It's a whole weird timeline. I love Donald Blake, but it's a weird one.
Don Blake?
Yeah.
He first sees Thor making beds float in a children's hospital, entertaining the children. So he goes looking for him there, but it's Donald Blake. So throughout this whole thing, Loki uses his powers, and the first thing that he does is that he makes a group of pedestrians into negatives.
Mm-hmm.
So like a photo negative. Mm-hmm. So they're black with white outlines, and everybody's like, no. So that calls Thor out, and then the craziness goes from there. He then flies on a magic carpet. He rides pigeons through Times Square. He throws people on the tracks of the subway. He takes a trip to Central Park Zoo, and then gets tied to Thor's hammer and thrown back to Asgard.
Can we the pigeon thing.
Yeah.
Can we we'll have to post this, because if I'm not mistaken, in this scene, there's a part where he says, "Begone pigeons," or something like that. And it is the most glorious thing you could ever think of Loki doing.
This whole comic is glorious. He's literally riding a flock of pigeons through the air. He has like a foot on two of them, but they're all together. There's also a part he makes, so he rises into the air on this carpet, which is actually the carpet from a really fancy hotel. And then he's like, "Come join me, Thor." And so Thor has to spin his hammer really fast to fly like a helicopter. So then he uses the sun's reflection off of Thor's hammer to hypnotize Thor so that he'll do his bidding.
I don't remember that, and that's insane.
Yeah. But then he gets Thor to drop the hammer, and if Thor is away from the hammer for more than 60 seconds, he turns back into Don.
Yeah.
And then Don breaks the spell. It's so much. So much happens in this 22-page comic. It's mind-blowing. But when we leave him in this comic, he's back in Asgard.
Yep.
All right? Before we head any further in the comics, if you have all been listening to any of our Marvel seasons, you know that I love to dig through my little Marvel collector cards. So here is the Loki card from 1990. And of course, the stats are some of the best parts. So he's 6'4".
Yeah, wow.
Right, tall guy.
Is that horns included?
I think it's horns included. I do think it's horns included. Although, how heavy are the horns? Because his weight is 525 pounds.
Yeah, Asgardians are dense.
We run into this. Lots of dense heroes. Super dense. So Battle's fault, I was British for a second, 9,372.
Battles fought.
Battles won, 5,679. Losses, 2,959. And ties, can't forget the ties,
I guess,
734. So his win percentage is 61%. So
he wins quite a bit.
He does. He does. He's shifty. We know this about him. So Loki is the adopted son of Odin, ruler of the Asgardian gods. Jealous of the love Odin feels for his true son, Thor, Loki devotes his immortal existence to plotting the destruction of his noble stepbrother. Occasionally, he even tries to overthrow his father. With his vast knowledge of sorcery and cruel cunning, Loki truly lives up to his title as the god of evil.
God of Evil is a bit extreme. I like God of Mischief.
He
Just
has a
saying.
lot of monikers.
Oh, yeah.
God of stories, God of mischief, God of lies, God of tricks.
I mean, it all makes sense.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's whatever he's feeling that day.
Exactly.
So that actually brings us to the Avengers #1, which came out in September of 1963. And this was actually this was by Lee and Kirby.
Yeah, Stanley and Jack Kirby.
This is like the holy grail of the beginning of the
I mean,
Avengers.
they are the fathers of modern comics, I would say. I mean, they're responsible for a lot of heroes that we have in the MCU.
Absolutely. And this is the team that we've all been obsessed with for the past decade. So Loki has been banished yet again to the Isle of Silence on Asgard by the gods,
right.
and comes up with a scheme to project his mind using thought projection to Earth. And so the way that this is shown is that there are just these very evil Loki eyes floating in the sky.
It does look cool. I'm not gonna lie.
It does look cool, but I just love thought projection. That's my favorite.
Yeah.
They're like, we're going to banish him to this island, but we're not going to take any of his powers into account.
Rule number 1, take their powers away.
Right away. I mean, he got you with the tree the last time. I mean, come on, people. You put him on a whole island? So there he is thought projecting, and he's like, how can I get Thor's attention? So he just happens to see this green bean flying through the air, and it's the Hulk. Mm-hmm. He's just leaping. He's a very good leaper. He leaps a lot.
Well, he can't fly, so
no, he just
makes sense.
Leaps and bounds. Mm-hmm. And so Loki decides, well, what am I going to do? I know, there's a train track. He puts a vision of dynamite on the train tracks. And the Hulk, being a hero, says, I have to save that train track from this dynamite.
Of course.
But he misjudges his leap because there really isn't dynamite there.
What is he, a scientist?
Oh, but not as the Hulk. He's just pure fury. And he comes crashing down on the train tracks and smashes it. And then the conductor on an coming train is like, oh my God, Hulk has been trying to kill us this entire time. Even though the Hulk ends up holding the tracks up, saves everybody. But they're like, guess what? We hate you now. So in all the papers, the headlines read, the Hulk is the worst. We hate him. He tried to kill these people.
Rude.
So apparently at this time, the Hulk had a group of teens that loved him called the Teen Brigade.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they're like, we got to help the Hulkster. And they get on there because they're ham radio enthusiasts.
Yep.
So they jump on that. They're like, let's call the Fantastic Four. They know the Hulk is a great guy. We'll get him. Well, as they're sending out this transmission to the Fantastic Four, Loki uses his mind powers yet again and screws all the ham radio waves. So instead of going to the Fantastic Four, it actually ends up going to Iron Man, Ant-Man and the Wasp, and Thor.
Out of everybody that is there, it just goes to those 4.
Yep. And so the Hulk runs away because no one loves him. He goes to live a life in the circus where he juggles lions and elephants and things like that.
He literally is dressed as a clown.
Literally.
Yeah.
Literally. So then they all come together. They save him. It was a big misunderstanding. And as Loki goes radioactive, because he finally travels to Earth, he's going to blow them all up, but they trap him in this like ironclad bin. Mm-hmm. They take a second and Wasp says, hey guys, this is really nice. We should do this more often. And they're like, you know what? You're right. What should we call ourselves? She's like, the Avengers and they're like, shut up, broad. That's it. And I will say, I did not like the way they spoke to Wasp throughout this entire
No, yeah, it's not great.
It's literally like Ant-Man and the Wasp are getting ready to go, and he's like, maybe if you didn't have to put on rouge on every second, you dumb lady.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, even just seeing this lineup of the Avengers and what we have in the MCU, that's a completely different thing. But how they talk to women in this comic is not the best, and it is definitely like it would not be okay today.
No.
But it's like that happened so much back then that it's just like, I guess, like this is, I mean, you have Wasp, which is on the same level as Ant-Man, but it's fine.
But that's even the thing, right? If you look at the cover and in the interior first page, it's like meet the Avengers, and she's not really even mentioned on the cover at all.
Not the first one, yeah.
No, and then like as you go in it, like she just says silly things. All she's like is like, "Oh, I'd love to be paired with that Thor because he's so dreamy." And then she's like, "I don't want to be with Tony Stark. He's ugly." I mean, I was like surprised they gave her the idea to name them the Avengers. I'm like, what is this woman's job?
She named the Avengers.
I mean, that's it. I mean, I was so proud that she got that because throughout the entire thing, I'm like, I don't get her. She's like, I have wings, you know? He's like, well, fly on these wasps, you idiot. It's going to be too far.
I mean, she also didn't even get to finish her sentence. I wanted to know what the other name was.
What were? Best Friends Club? Mighty Morphin Power Heroes?
Yay!
Yeah. So that's how that ends. So Loki is actually the reason that the Avengers became the Avengers.
Exactly.
How about that, Loki?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you created your greatest enemies.
Thanks.
Sorry about it. So let's move on to some more recent comics. So in 2011, there was Thor: The Trials of Loki.
Mm-hmm.
And this was really interesting. I like this. It was 4 issues. And what this really felt like is that it was deep in the lore of the Norse gods.
Yeah.
Really talking about the start of Ragnarok, talking about all the families, talking about the deceit and the death and the backstabbing. And basically, again, we see Loki being pretty villainous here.
Yeah, he's on the not the good side of Loki on this one.
Yeah.
Which I thought was, I mean, it's good because I think you need to see both of this because we've seen both in the MCU. And
Right.
we have no idea what this Loki in this show is going to be.
Right. And I think like in especially in those early ones in the 60s, he was just like a diabolical genius.
Yeah.
Always looking to, get Thor. But this really kind of shows you where he's coming from. We hear about him being the son of the frost giants and Odin taking him under his wing. But we also see how he's not treated the same as Thor,
Right.
or Balder, or anybody else in the Norse gods. And basically, Loki comes up with a scheme to kill Balder and basically get Ragnarok started, which will be the fall of the Norse gods.
Yeah, which is the end of the world for them.
Yeah. And at the end of this whole thing, we see Loki chained to a rock with a serpent dripping venom in his eyes for all eternity.
Which is exactly like in Norse mythology.
Yep. Yeah. So this one, and I really like the aesthetic of this one. A lot of the inner monologues are written what look like scrolls.
Right.
The font itself looks sort of old and Norse, and the styling is really cool in this.
I love this era of Thor comics, particularly because it did feel like that. It felt more Norse mythology. It had that Shakespearean look almost.
Yeah.
And then they kind of went away from it a little bit. And then when Jason Aaron got onto Thor and we got like the Mighty Thor and the Unworthy Thor, he mixed like the modern with Norse mythology. So it was cool. I like the journey with how they interpret Loki and how they interpret Thor, because I think you could go either route. And just like we've seen with the MCU, I feel like the first two, definitely the first one was more Shakespearean and, old gaudy.
Yeah.
And then we get to Ragnarok and it's just 80s madness.
Heck yeah. Makeup.
Yeah.
Crazy colors.
Yeah.
And I think that as an origin story, this all works in that sort of aesthetic. We got to see Loki in those early comics just already bat out of hell coming for Thor.
It was like he was already doing stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But this is all the stuff that paints that past picture of
Right.
why he has that fury against Thor and why he's always felt sort of unloved and uncared for in the realm of the Norse gods.
Exactly.
So this one I really enjoyed. I got through it really quickly. And if you're a mythology lover, I really do enjoy mythology. This is definitely for you.
Yeah.
And we see the trickster Loki here, right? We see Loki the trickster, Loki the unloved, Loki the god killer. They
Right.
call him in this one. And he uses all of his Loki wiles to get over on people. He manages to find all the loopholes to any plan to get through, right? So it's like, we can bring Balder back, but everyone has to cry. And he's like, hee hee,
Yeah.
I'm not going to cry. He always finds the way to get over on people. And that's where that trickster moment really comes in for Loki. And we see that a lot in this one.
Yeah, that's almost like part of his powers. I mean, he has the illusion stuff, he has the sorcery, he has all of that, but it's almost like his powers to be able to escape anything or at least deceive. whatever he's trying to do.
He's got like the gift of gab.
Exactly.
You know, he can like talk himself out of any situation.
Which I guess you kind of have to. If you can turn into other people,
Yeah.
you kind of have to be a master of like being other people.
Yeah, yeah. And he does a lot of shape-shifting in this one. He becomes a wasp. He becomes a manta ray. He becomes an eagle. And that's all really cool to see too.
Mm-hmm.
So this one really gives us that backstory. So I also took a look at Loki, the god who fell to Earth. This came out in 2019, and this is by Kibblesmith.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like in the introduction to this. This is 5 issues, and he writes in the introduction, Loki is a story about and for, and honestly by, the kids who really try to do everything right and still get punished for it. Those who can't shut off their minds, who don't think before they speak, who try every door just to see if it's unlocked, and then the next door behind it.
Yep.
I love that description.
I mean, I was so happy when you read this one, because when you read that introduction, you're like, okay, this writer gets it.
Mm-hmm.
This writer gets Loki. Like, depending on whatever situation he's going to put Loki in, at least he gets that baseline of that's why people love Loki.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yes, he can be a villain. He can be an anti-hero. He can decide to help. But it's like, once you know that, I mean, he's a god. He's been alive forever.
Yeah.
But he always feels that. He always feels all of those things, but he's constantly being put in that situation. So
Yeah.
it's really cool to see that somebody took that and like put that at the forefront. Because you get that a little bit like in the Trials of Loki. It's like, yeah, of course he's jealous and stuff like that. But it's like when you get that other like parental not accepting this and then not even being accepted by the frost giants, it's like, what am I supposed to do?
Exactly.
Okay, everybody hates me. I will make sure everybody hates me.
And I think that's the thing about Loki is, like you're saying, there's a piece of Loki that when you look at him, you almost feel like, oh, I might be sort of like that too. Whereas our greater heroes, they are the gods. They make the right decisions. They do all the saving. And it's like, although I like reading those stories, it's like, am I actually like that? Do I make the right choice every time? Probably not. So that's why Loki kind of brings it down to earth. It's funny, a god can almost make the characters feel more human.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think that's a mark of a good writer to begin with, and being able to relate it like that. And I feel like that's what this Loki comic did. It made Loki a little more relatable.
Yeah.
But put him in interesting situations as well.
Smaller horns, cool t-shirt.
Right.
You know, he's got the whole thing going for him now.
Yeah, he looked much more modern.
Yeah. Yeah. His low-key t-shirt that he wears, which we all want now. When we first meet Loki in this one, he's actually in a good place. Yeah. He just helped Thor defeat a big bad. He's now sitting on the throne of Jotunheim. What is it?
Jotunheim.
Jotunheim.
Derek was like, how do you, it's Jotunheim. I'm like, no.
You know, and we just came from a world where J's were Y's in Shadow and Bone, and I've completely lost it again.
Yeah.
Back to 1. But he's not happy there.
Yeah.
He feels like, well, I've done it, but I don't want this.
Jotunheim is the frost giants.
Yeah.
And it's nothing but ice. I mean, think about just the whole thing you're ruling is Antarctica. Mm-hmm. That's it. There's nothing but big blue frost giants that just want to kill and murder around. And it's like, okay.
So what does he do?
This is great.
He uses some enchanted stones, puts them in a snowman, and says, you rule in my stead. I will name you Frost.
Jack Frost.
Exactly.
Frosty the Snowman.
And then he goes and visits Thor. He's like, Thor, come on. What can I do? I don't want to do this anymore. There's got to be some bigger things out there. Maybe I can be a hero with you. Thor's like, come with me. Let's go to the library. We're going to look at the book of Loki. So there's books of Loki that have his full story. And he's like, look, at the end of the books of Loki, you're happy. Mm-hmm. You're in a good place. Isn't that awesome? And Loki's like, no.
Yep.
It's not awesome. So these two little beings named Then and Now strike a deal with Loki, and they say, basically, they take him to this giant library that has all of the stories of every hero. And it's like, here's all of the fan fiction that has ever existed of every hero.
Yep.
You know, it's like Wolverine's is huge, Spider-Man's is huge, Loki's is not there.
Yeah.
And they decide, well, let's play a game of chess. If you win, you sign a book, and then you can have as many stories as you want. And so what does Loki do? He plays chess, he wins, he signs the book, and he gets as many stories as he wants. And from there, he tries to get Stony Tark.
You literally said Stony Tark,
Remember Stony Tark?
which was my
Stony Tark.
thing. I'm glad it went to you this time. This Marvel season, it went to you.
Stony Tark. I love Stony Tark. Stony Tark is my man. So he goes to Tony Stark, Stony Tark, and he's like, "Can I be an Avenger?" And he's like, "Absolutely not. Get out of here."
Mm-hmm.
And while this whole thing is happening, Nightmare is creeping about. He's taking over people's dreams. He's deleting their memories. He's doing horrible things.
Nightmare was a person that we were theorizing was going to be the villain in WandaVision. Turns out it wasn't, but it's cool to see him here.
All those theories.
Yeah. Get ready.
For
There's
not-
going to be more in this one.
I know. We don't even know what's going on. So he, again, finds himself in a place of going, do I want to be a hero? Do I want to be a villain? What is my past? What is my present? What is my future? And again, we're seeing Loki have the opportunity to do good and be happy.
Does he?
He does some good. He's sort of happy, but we do see a flash forward to the future where he's fighting with Thor again and is going to strike him down.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how the 4th volume ends. The 5th volume is sort of like this like little spaghetti western, and we meet a character named Verity Willis who can like see that, like, knows the truth when someone tells it to her, and they're about to go through some sort of green portal.
Yeah.
And that's where it ends.
Yeah. The 5th one kind of set it up for other things, and this story takes place after the War of Realms giant event that happened in Thor. So it's cool to see where Loki is at. But I mean, the important thing about this comic was Loki was happy, but he's never happy being happy.
Yeah.
Because 1, it's a little too easy sometimes, and 2, he just can't sit there like that. He can't, if that's what happiness is, that's not for him.
Yeah.
He can't just be like, okay, I'm going to sit on this throne.
This is great.
Cool.
No.
Bored.
He's the god of mischief.
Yeah, he needs to be canoodling.
Stimulated by things. There is this side thing with a character whose wife is kind of dusted out of her life in a sense. And he's like, well, you're young. Go find her. You can find her again. Nightmare has dibble-dabbled in her life. And then he has this inner monologue as he sends her off, and he goes, Did I just do a heroism?
Yeah, you did a little bit.
I love his humor in this one. It's so good.
Yeah, I really feel like, especially after the MCU Loki, the comics really started getting like Tom Hiddleston's spin on it.
Absolutely.
He's always, I mean, Tom Hiddleston pulled from the comics, but you can see that they're starting to look like him.
Yeah.
They kind of are more funny like him. So it's interesting how the comics can influence the movies, but also it happens vice versa.
Totally.
Sometimes I'm here for it. Sometimes I'm not. In this case, I don't mind it.
It works.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he says, I am Loki, god of outcasts. And that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
Done. Loki is just having sort of a new future ahead of him, it seems.
Yeah. He's been through the ringer in the last 10 years, I would say. There's a really good one, King Thor, where it shows Loki. It's like way in the future. And this is where Thor has 3 daughters. They're amazing, by the way. But he's Loki, the god butcher. And it's like this whole big thing. So it's like Loki will always end up being the adversary for Thor.
Yeah.
Even if his intentions initially were not that way. But it always ends in the same thing. And that's the thing, I think, with Norse mythology, and especially how the MCU does it as well, or the Marvel comics, is they die, they get reborn.
Right.
It's just a cycle over and over again. And sometimes it's a little different with Loki. There was a mistake in his body went into Sif, which we know from the Thor movies. And that's where Lady Loki came about. Also, he was a child for a while.
Yeah.
Love Kid Loki. Love him to death. There's been like multiple Lokis at the same time. So it's like the more you look at Loki, the more it's like, okay, I get why he would be involved in the Loki show and what we know so far with the TVA. So it's interesting how it's lining up, because initially I would have never thought Loki would be with the TVA. I'm like, that's Fantastic Four stuff. That's not Loki.
Exactly.
But now it makes sense.
Totally. Right. He's messed up so many timelines. Of course the TVA has to step in.
Right.
So speaking of the TVA, let's talk about them a little bit.
We got to talk about the TVA.
Got to talk about the TVA. TVA is, of course, Time Variance Authority. They first appeared in Thor Volume 1, number 372, and according to Marvel.com, the Time Variance Authority is an agency concerned with monitoring realities throughout the multiverse and attempting to keep temporal interference to a minimum. They operate from the null time zone dimension, in which time cannot be interfered with, and have a working relationship with time travelers such as King the Conqueror. The TVA's highest authority is their director, Mr. Alternity. Beneath him are various administrators, each an identical clone, including Mr. Mobius M. Mobius, Mr. Ouroboros, Mr. Paradox, and Mr. Tesseract.
That last one might sound familiar.
Dun, dun, dun. And Mr. Mobius M. Mobius is actually who Owen Wilson will be playing in the Loki series.
Yeah, there's not much on him in the comics, really. I mean, the TVA have been in and out.
Yeah.
They haven't really been a big thing, so even just seeing that name is going to be in the MCU was shocking,
Right.
nonetheless. But Mobius and Mobius is just middle management.
Totally.
That's literally all he is.
Yeah. He's just like given a file of complaints and he has to go find the people and put them on trial, basically.
Yeah.
And that's how we meet him in these 2 issues of the Fantastic Four that we took a look at. So number 353 and 354, these came out in 1991, which doesn't sound like a long time ago, but was
That's pretty much as old as I am.
30 years ago. Yeah, out of control. I was 6. So the Fantastic Four are brought to the TVA by Justice Peace, who is this like character in sort of USA military garb with a giant star.
Which makes total sense.
Absolutely.
In
He's
the null universe.
Yeah, he's from an alternate timeline, but he got brought to the TVA to work for them. Maybe he'll make an appearance in Loki. Who knows? You never know. But they're basically put on trial for altering the timeline of their reality, which was supposed to have ended, but they interfered and kept it going.
Yeah.
So they get there, they're put on trial, they're put into a holding cell. There's also the Fantastic Four and the Thing's love interest.
Yeah.
This red-haired lady named Shari. So Shari ends up using her feminine wiles.
Always.
And she puts on a southern accent. Something's happening with my voice. And she gets them out. She's like, well, my, Mr. Mobius, this place sure does look fancy. Why don't you give us a little tour? And sure enough, he's like, oh, anything for you, sexy lady. And this is actually... The tour is what I want to talk about because we get to see specific parts of TVA. So the first place they go to is the Hall of Discontinued Universes. So this is
fun.
This is where canceled timelines are sent, and their leftover detritus is launched into nothingness. And really, it just is like, there's like Minutemen, which are sort of like their soldiers, just like shoveling stuff in dumpsters.
Which are universes.
Universes, lives, humans, humanoids, just dying.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Fun.
The biggest area in TVA is Hall of Chronometry.
Mm-hmm.
So here, time in the Omniverse is measured, charted, recorded, and ultimately judged. Chrono monitors sit and watch each timeline as it unfurls before them. They will look out for events, categorize their importance, and follow any probable variances in the line. If things get too wonky, they will destroy it.
The whole thing.
The whole thing. And it's literally just like these like bald beings at desks, like endless desks. And every time a new timeline is created, a new chronomonitor is created.
Yeah.
They
It's
just
wild.
appear. It's really cool. And this is where they sit and do their job and monitor all things time related.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, it's a cool visual. I'm curious to see if we're going to get that in this. I would hope so.
They have
It would
to.
be weird if it wasn't.
Yeah.
What's the point of the TVA if we don't get people shoveling universes and realities into dumpsters?
Yeah. And in this panel that's in this Fantastic Four issue is actually what's on the Marvel.com website for the TVA profile.
Right.
So it's like, I feel like that is such a well-known visual for them that they have to at least give some honor to it in the Loki TV show.
Yeah, exactly.
There's also one other area I wanted to mention just because I think it's hilarious. So in order for them to escape the TVA, they find themselves at the Cross Time Central Railroad.
Yeah.
And there's just a bunch of trains. And there's some alien conductors. And the payment for the conductor to get them out of the TVA to their timeline is he is a full Earth train enthusiast. He likes things to be materialized down to the last detail. So once they're about to jump off that train into their timeline, they have to take off all their clothes so he can make it into costumes for his time travel train rides.
Yep.
So they land on Earth in their bloomers, and it ends with the Thing and Johnny fighting, as it always does.
Yeah, I mean, this one, the payment of stripping is interesting.
They're all wearing very sensible briefs, nothing too crazy. You know, it's the 90s, so everything was just very status quo. But I thought that was really funny. But I did like being in the TVA, seeing it exist, seeing how it works, seeing how they handle things. And basically, if you flub up a timeline, you're going to be put on trial for it.
Yeah, and mind you that this came out so long ago, and the MCU typically likes to change things for the comics. So, I mean, I'm sure it's going to be different. There are characters with the TVA that are going to be important, I feel like, in the show, but also definitely later on. So you had mentioned Kang the Conqueror, which is a very big character in the comics, and he just got cast in the MCU, but he's not going to be appearing until Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. So, but just the connection between, we know there's a character in this show called Renslayer, and she is with the TVA. They have a interesting connection and relationship with Kang the Conqueror. So it seems like these bridges are starting to be put together a little bit the more you think about it. So I think it's going to be interesting if Loki somehow ties to Ant-Man. I mean, again, that's just, I mean, the connections here are just weird.
Yeah. Then Doctor Strange is going to come out. Wanda's going to pop up. Who knows what's going to happen?
Yeah. All right. So let's get into MCU stuff.
Yeah, let's do it.
This is stuff that's going to be directly impacting the Loki show. It's been more than 2 years since Endgame hit theaters. So we could all use a little refresher on what happened with our God of Mischief in here. So the first time we saw him was in Thor. Came out in 2011. Now, this movie isn't just an origin story for Thor, also for Loki. This is where we first meet him. And it introduces the mischievous brother. It shows the dynamic between Thor, Loki, and Odin. In this film, Thor is banished from Asgard by his father after provoking a war between the Frost Giants, i.e., Loki's true heritage,
right,
where he comes from. Thor's banishment makes Loki the new heir to the throne. But when you know it, their father Odin is about to take a really long nap. So after, in the Thor movie, it looks like he's perished in his plan once it got foiled. So we assume that Loki died.
Yeah.
Like it's just not clear. But there's a running theme with this because Loki always seemingly dies and he's not really actually dead.
Right. His story just keeps rewriting itself.
Exactly. The next time we see him is in Avengers. This came out in 2012. Of all the films to watch, this is probably the one to watch because it's not only that he has the most screen time, but you get a lot of this character. And also, good thing to point out, this is the Loki that's going to be in the Loki show.
Right.
All the other movies after this isn't our Loki. He died.
R.I.P.
So this is the one that I would say, oh, what should I watch before it? You have a couple days by the time this episode comes out. So watch Avengers 2012. We see Loki on a mission to seize control Earth. He's made an alliance with Thanos, who's given him an army of Chitauri to help him conquer the planet. That's pretty much what it is.
Best friends.
But because of this, and just like in the comics, Loki brings together Earth's mightiest heroes, the Avengers. So once again, his plan is foiled, but not until after he uses the Tesseract. Another Infinity Stone, he briefly opens a portal into space. He lets all the alien invaders in. He was finally beaten by the Avengers, thanks Hulk, mostly Hulk, for that amazing scene where he says, puny God. And he's taken into custody by the end of the film. So hey, thank Loki, Avengers, because
he did it again.
Exactly. They wouldn't be together without them. All right, on to everybody's favorite MCU film, Thor: The Dark World.
Everybody loves it. Can't stop talking about it.
Came out in 2013. This movie has been hailed as one of the worst MCU films, but it has its redeeming qualities. Hear me out. Don't turn this episode off. I also personally like this movie, but not for a lot of the stuff that happens in it, for the Loki and Thor stuff.
Sure.
That's why I like this movie.
Plus we get more Jane.
Right. If you just kind of take out Malekith and the Dark Elves, it's like, it's not a bad movie about brothers. So the film picks up where the Avengers ended. We see Thor imprisoning Loki. He's trapped there. Soon enough, another threat arrives in the form of the Dark Elves. So this is where Malekith comes in, played by Christopher Eccleston. The first Helmer of Doctor Who when it got rebooted. Forever going to have a special place in my heart. But he could have pulled off Malekith a little better. Malekith could have been better in this.
Not every role's a winner.
No. So Malekith, he wants to get the ether from Jane Foster. This is when she's infected with it. This forces Thor to turn to Loki for help because dark elves are going to be coming. He needs to protect Jane. Loki can help. He still has faith in his brother, which is nice. The important moment for Loki in this film is when he assists the dark elves. So they're invading Asgard, and from his prison self, you remember this, he tells the guards where to go. He also kind of escapes at the same moment, but this action directly resulted in his mother getting killed because he directed them to the area where his mother was. So that wasn't great. Regardless of how Loki usually feels about Thor, Freya, depending on what era of Thor you're reading or what you're used to, she has always been the constant for them. She's the mother. She's been nice. In some stories, she's been an asshole. But especially in the last, I wouldn't say 10 years, she's kind of been a nice person to Loki. Like, she's considered him a son, regardless.
Right, totally.
She's like, you're my son, it's fine. Even though he literally did stab her in the back not too long ago.
Not great.
Yeah. So after that, another important moment for Loki in this is when he sacrifices himself to save the day. But in the end, when Thor goes to Odin to be like, Loki saved the day, he sacrificed himself. Thor leaves. Then we see Odin turn into Loki. So Loki is disguising himself as Odin. So he did survive that. And he also got the throne at the same time.
He's such a trickster.
The next time we see Loki, and this is one of my personal favorites, is Thor Ragnarok in 2017. So Ragnarok sees Thor out to prevent the long foretold apocalyptic destruction of Asgard, known as Ragnarok.
That's where it comes from.
Exactly. So this has kept him away from Asgard. And upon his return, he finds that Loki has been impersonating his father on the throne. So that's the last time we saw him. And then now he's like, oh, you're lying. Yeah. You're not Odin. You're Loki. But this is where we get the Matt Damon, the reenactment of stories that happened in Thor universe. And I can't wait for Love and Thunder to see the next one. Melissa McCarthy is playing Hela.
So good.
Come on. I'm ready for this. So long story short, this leads to the debut of Thor and Loki's sister, Hela, played by Cate Blanchett. So she easily dispatches the two brothers who are flung across the universe by the Bifrost to a gladiatorial planet known as Sakaar. And this is where we get Jeff Goldblum, we get Korg, we get some of the funniest moments in the MCU. Funny enough, in a Thor movie.
I know.
But time works a little differently there. So Loki's been there for longer than Thor has when he arrives there. Also, Hulk has been there much longer than that.
He got a haircut, some plastic surgery.
Right. Loki teams up with Valkyrie, Hulk, and Thor to defeat Hela in one of the coolest action pieces in the MCU. It's when they're on the Rainbow Bridge and they're trying to get over there. We see that's where Loki did the slow-mo dagger flip. He's also dispatching enemies with his horned helm. I was waiting for him to, I'm like, it looks cool, but is it functional?
Do something with it, friend.
It is very functional. He uses it.
Yeah.
Love it. That's where we leave Loki in that. He's helped them.
Yeah.
He's helped the Asgardians escape. Asgard gets destroyed because Surtur destroys it. Thor is like, the only way I can defeat my sister is if I defeat Asgard. And so Loki is tasked with getting Surtur's helm, putting it in the eternal flame, summoning Surtur. So he did help them, and they escape. But at the end of that movie, if you remember,
again.
we see Thanos' ship come into view with the last Asgardians on the ship.
Sheesh.
So we know something great isn't going to happen.
No, bad news is on the horizon.
Last two movies.
Take a deep breath, everyone. It's gonna get wild.
I do want to say, though, that there's like this like Loki trilogy. And if you really want to see like a complete arc from like start to finish, I would say it's like Thor, Dark World, and Avengers and all that. So it's like all of this stuff is really, it's like a redemption arc for him and his relationship with Thor. Like, I feel like it's the best it is at this point. So we're at Infinity War. So Avengers Infinity War that came out in 2018. If you're only in this for Loki's story, you can stop Infinity War at like 15 minutes. I felt really bad when I wrote that in my notes because I'm like, he dies? The opening scene picks up where the end credits for Thor Ragnarok left off. The ship filled with the remaining Asgardians has been boarded by Thanos, who is after the Space Stone, which is housed in the Tesseract, the blue cube.
Blue cube.
Just as the visual, in case you forgot. So Thanos begins to torture Thor, demanding the cube when Loki reveals it to Thanos. So this is him trying to protect his brother.
Right.
At first, it seems that Loki is once again breaking bad and offering to join Thanos. He makes an ill-fated attempt at killing Thanos, which, I mean, you should have done more magic. Why with the daggers?
He just loved them so much from Ragnarok that he wanted to use them again. But when you're literally a god, can't you do something else?
He can. And I think that's been my biggest grievance with Loki in the MCU. He does a lot more magic in the comics. He is a sorcerer.
Yeah.
He became Sorcerer Supreme in the comics. He took Doctor Strange's title. So it's like, he can do magic. Let's see a little more, guys.
Yeah, remember his thought beams that he sent to Earth? Hello, he can ruin ham radio waves. The man knows what he's doing. The being knows what he's doing, I should say.
Exactly. So he doesn't stop the Mad Titan, and he ends up getting choked to death by Thanos. I want to say it's honestly probably the harder deaths to watch in all of the MCU. There hasn't been too many, but there's been some, and I think this one, it's very intimate. It's like you have Thor looking at his brother being killed, and Thor lost his father, lost his mother, lost his world. He only has the last remaining Asgardians on his ship. It's like, what? Give the dude a break.
Yeah, and I think part of what makes it so emotional is their relationship is so back and forth. You know that Thor always wants Loki to come out on the side of good. And so seeing him here defending him and then losing his life for him is ultimate horrible sadness.
I bet he wishes that he didn't
Give up his life for him?
Yeah, he's like, I wish you weren't good right now.
Yeah.
He's like, you probably would have been, maybe not. I mean, Thor did Loki did kind of not go through with Thanos' plan in the Avengers movie, the first one. So I think Thanos at this point was just like, I'm done with you. Like, you're just too slimy.
I'm going to squash you, you little bug man.
After this first 15 minutes, seeing Thanos take out Hulk, seeing Thanos kill Loki, seeing Thor essentially just be completely dismantled of everything and who his character is, they weren't messing around in this one. So in Avengers Endgame, the tone is a little bit lighter with Loki.
I was like, where's he going with this? Lighter, okay.
So Endgame came out in 2019. Loki's story arc got a reboot of sorts in Avengers Endgame, which had Earth's mightiest heroes travel back in time through their own timeline in order to pluck various Infinity Stones from history, reset Thanos' universe-changing actions that happened at the end of Infinity War. So Thanos did the snap. Right. Completely took out half of the universe's population. Some of our heroes are gone. Some of our heroes are alive.
R.I.P. WandaVision. You just have to bring them up. You
have to. Their travels through time weren't without a few missteps, though, including the incident that sets up the events for the Loki TV show. So it's really cool that even if they didn't plan this, they had to have because Loki disappears. It's so interesting how they took the events from the very first Avengers movie, somehow brought it to the end of this saga, and then also used that to set up the future. These people that work at Marvel are insane.
You have to wonder, like, do these ideas come to them in dreams, or are they just on, like, caffeine benders throughout the middle of the night, and someone's just like, Timeline Loki! Screaming.
I mean, probably both. It has to be. I mean, there's like one set that just constantly ingests caffeine, and then one set that is just having fever dreams.
Exactly.
And then Kevin Feige is just like, yes, no, yes,
He's
no.
like, give me your fever notes. Let me look them over. Yes, this one will take. Thank you.
So in Endgame, Iron Man and Ant-Man travel back to 2012 and attempt to steal the Infinity Stone that Loki used to open the portal for the aliens' Armada. Arriving just after the trickster god is defeated, their plan backfires. So this is when they're going down Avengers Tower and Hulk kind of does this Hulk thing. Loki acquires the Tesseract after it gets kicked aside to him, and he escapes through a portal to an unknown location. So his whereabouts and actions after that point are unknown. We have no idea. And his encounter with the Infinity Stone effectively rebooted his story and created an entirely new timeline. So that's the visual that we've seen. We saw it with the Ancient One and Bruce Banner, where we see that, I want to call it the Prime timeline. And when the Infinity Stones are taken out or there's universe changing things, there's branches that come off.
Exactly.
And we also see that visual in some of the trailers for Loki.
Yeah.
So he created a whole new timeline, especially for himself. Because
with multiple branches, apparently.
Exactly. So that brings us, we got some comic history, we got MCU history of Loki. I know it was a little fast, but I could have talked about each one of these movies for like 3 hours, and I had to control myself and just talk about Loki.
You hit the Loki sweet spots.
I really tried to. So this is what brings us to Loki. Everything we know, the journey that he's been on emotionally, siblingly, career-wise. It's been a lot.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what they pull from his back catalog, from his stories. We even get a glimpse in one of the trailers of him standing there in a suit with a vote for Loki pin, which is taken directly from the comics. I'm wondering if each of these episodes is going to be a different branch of the timeline that they're trying to fix. Is it all going to be discombobulated? Is it going to be running all over the place? What is the ultimate goal of the Loki series?
Loki not having the development of like Thor Ragnarok and anything that happened after the Avengers, to where he got to the point where he saved the rest of the Asgardian people and all of that, and having that relationship with his brother to where he would sacrifice himself for him, legitimately sacrifice himself for him. It's going to be interesting. I'm curious if they're going to put him on that path again. And then with going through all these different timelines and doing all this stuff, maybe not with Thor, but experiencing it with other people and probably alternate versions of himself, that he might go back into that. Like he might have his own weird redemption arc.
Yeah.
Or they might go the opposite way. Maybe he gets worse.
And he escapes even more and causes even more trouble.
Yeah.
Or is he at some point going to be reminded of what was going to happen to him? Is he going to see that flash of him losing his life? And
I'm curious if he's going to see his book.
Right.
If he sees his story and what he's going to do with that, maybe he'll see that story and see that he died being weak, or what he would see as being weak and loving his brother, or defending his people.
And that was his ultimate weakness.
Exactly.
Was loving his brother.
So I don't know. I think it's interesting. I feel like WandaVision. Like how excited I was for WandaVision. I feel that with the show because I have no idea. I'm seeing characters on there where I'm like, okay, that's Renslayer, that's Mobius. I don't know who that is. I don't know what this is.
Yeah.
Who is Miss Minute?
I know. I love Miss Minute.
So it's so exciting to go into something that's so completely new and just seems bonkers. The whole time traveling stuff and Endgame was, for lack of a better word, could have probably been better. But they're going full force into like alternate stuff, timelines, and we're going to apparently see Lady Loki, which I'm so excited for. Who knows? Maybe we'll see Kid Loki.
Yeah,
I'm so excited.
Yeah, I'm super excited too. I'm just even loving the aesthetic of the show. It looks sort of like 60s, 70s. A lot of the screens are rounded, more bubbly. The costumes feel very old school. They just do such a good job when they bring it back that far.
Yeah,
we saw that. We saw that even in Captain America. We saw that in WandaVision. When they set it back 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, that's when it looks cool. That's when it gets exciting. That's when it almost feels new and fresh, even though it's going to the past.
Exactly.
And then we do have that sassy Miss Minute.
Yeah.
Just telling them to wait for their time in court.
I love her voice because it's very like Southern.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have expected it, but I'm fine. Yeah. We see in this, all we know from this is Loki gets captured, obviously, because he created a timeline event that caught their attention, and he either needs to comply and help them or get disintegrated.
Yeah.
Seems like a easy option.
And he has a very dystopian collar on his neck, which may or may not explode at some point in time.
2 Hunger Games, 2
Battle Royale.
Suicide Squad.
Yeah.
We've seen it. It's not good. All right. So that brings us to this. We will be covering Loki. The schedule is going to be a little different this season because Loki comes out on Wednesdays. Thanks for creating this mayhem.
Talk
Loki.
about wonky timelines. Things are going to get crazy.
So this Wednesday, we will watch Loki, and then the first episode will come out. So I'm super excited.
Yeah, we'll see you all then.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for listening to A Bite Of, artwork and editing by our own Noah. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on Instagram at A Bite Of Pod and on Facebook at A Bite Of. If you have questions, recommendations, or just want to say hi, you can email us at abiteofpod@gmail.com. You can find us on all podcast platforms. Please be sure to rate and review to spread the word. Hope you join us next time on A Bite Of. Bye.